So I am Matti Nummelin, I'm the member of the first committee on capacity building, and I'm very happy that in this capacity building hub, the event is now held by CDKN, which is our good collaborator. We already in the last COP had a very fruitful side event together, and looking forward for the fruitful collaboration.
I'm Shanazi Musa, the Director of the Climate and Development Knowledge Network. On my right is Maggie Dupont, our KN strategic lead, and on my left is Sylvie Sai, who's been part of the previous CDKN as well. So what I just want to explain to you what the CDKN is before we delve into the communication manual. The CDKN is an acronym for the Climate and Development Knowledge Network. It started originally in 2010 with core funding from DFID and with some additional funding from the Dutch government. The program was initially a partnership between South-North in Africa, LEAD, Pakistan in Asia, FLAR in Latin America, ODI and PwC. The main contact was held with PwC and the implementing partners. As of June this year, the leadership has shifted completely to the south, to South-North, and we are now funded by IDRC, the Canadians, and still funded by the Dutch government. The partnership now is one between ICLI South Asia in Delhi. They will look after the Asian program. FLAR is still involved and they're looking after the program in Latin America. And ODI is our knowledge management partner. So the mission of CDKN, when it started in 2010, and it's still the mission, is to enhance the quality of life for the poorest and most vulnerable affected by the impacts of climate change. We aim to do this through knowledge, research, and technical assistance, and we work in partnership with the public, private, and non-governmental organizations. How we currently, or the current focus of our program, which will start now in July, is that of knowledge, engagement, and peer learning. So what we aim to do is synthesize and tailor evidence and data, as well as learnings on climate compatible development into products that can be used by your decision makers and policy makers. We then engage with these decision makers and policy makers at a country level, sharing the knowledge products that we developed. And another strong component that we bring into the new program is peer learning, where there's a focus on learning between the development countries on the shared challenges and issues. And so moving now on to the scope for this session. Are there any questions on the Climate and Development Knowledge Network before I go into what the session is about? So this session is basically, some background. Through the 7 years of doing CDKN, there was a wealth of knowledge that the practitioners, and particularly people like Mary, who were working closely with the knowledge management function, there were lots of learnings that they realized from trying to communicate the climate change issues to your government, your business, to the whole spectrum of stakeholders. And we felt that it's an important lesson to be sharing with the climate change practitioners and especially knowledge worker community. And so that's the background to this document. So it's 7 years of experience that's been written down very beautifully into a document, which we are hoping to serve as a guide for climate practitioners. Our intention with this document, it's a discussion draft. So what what we're very keen is that people engage with it and feed back to us. Because like you said, this is CDKN's learning, and there's a whole universe of other learning that could potentially enhance this. So our process is that at the end of January, we're hoping to collate all the feedback and to redraft the document, and then to start taking it out and workshopping it in the deep engagement countries we're working. So that's the intention of this, and we really appreciate any feedback you have. Maggie will now talk you through the document itself, and then Cindy will talk us through one of the case studies which Cindy was part of delivering in Africa. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Shinaz. Hi everyone and welcome. Just in terms of an outline of what we're going to go through at the moment, we're going to speak about the universal principles of good communication that you can apply in the climate change field. We're going to talk about the sort of unique facets about discussing climate change in particular and how you can frame it for different audiences. We're going to discuss the importance of partnerships, a topic that's come up time and again at COP24, but in the specific context of partnerships for communication. We'll talk about how you can be smart about visualizing climate change impacts and solutions and using those in your communications. We'll talk about making good science go viral, and this is where Cindy's case study will come into play. And we'll also be talking about how we can stay low or zero emissions as much as possible in the way that we're running our communications campaigns. First of all, let's talk about the universal principles. Does anyone here have a marketing or a journalism degree? So I know there's a live streamed audience, but there's also a small group of people in the room. No one's raising their hand. Does anyone have communications in their job title? Several of you, great. Has anybody worked in communications in a sector other than climate change? Have you worked in public health or education? Yeah, you've had a show of a few hands. Well, so have I. I've worked on, clean oceans campaigns and rural agriculture communications campaigns, and it looks like you've had different experiences as well. When we, as a knowledge management and communications team, applied ourselves since 2010 to the task of communicating the physical science of climate change and adaptation and mitigation solutions, not just one-way broadcasts, but engaging with different audiences and having two-way conversations with them. One of the places we started was just basic good communications principles. And what can we take from the fields of marketing and public relations and public engagement campaigning generally, and other sectors where there have been successful campaigns, and how can we apply that to the climate change field? And so some of the basic principles we have applied in our work have been, well, starting with the audience. Who do you want to reach? Who do you want to engage with? It's kind of a marketing 101 principle, and it applies very clearly across all fields of climate communication that we've tried. And when you're doing that, understand your intended audience's knowledge and value set at the outset, or kind of consult with them and find out what their values are so that you're hitting the right buttons. Use framing and language that will resonate with your target audiences and evolve their understanding of and their contribution to solutions around climate change issues. Again, this is basic marketing and communications 101. So let me give you an example. Our first case study today is a public campaign that we and our partners, NRDC and the Indian Institute for Public Health and many others, were involved with in various cities in India. And one of the target audiences was communities in slums. I've shown you a poster that's in English, but most of the posters we started with were in Gujarati. And they were heavy on graphics, colourful pictures, telling people how they could stay safe in extreme heat events, which are becoming more and more common in those urban heat islands. So that was an appropriate format form of communication, these posters up in health clinics and on the side of rickshaws for the community audiences that we were trying to reach. Another case study from CDKN's experience is a cross-sector campaign that we mounted in Cartagena, Colombia, again with many institutional partners. We weren't the only ones, but we were trying to appeal to businesses, local government, and communities about how to address climate risks, and in particular the risks of both inland flooding and sea level rise and sea surges. And we're very conscious of highlighting the amazing cultural heritage. There's a World Heritage Site at the heart of the city of Cartagena in Colombia, and also a large working port. And so you can see on the left of the slide there some of the wording and some of the imagery that was used to try and appeal across those local audiences. It's speaking about a competitive Cartagena that's appealing to the business audience that will be climate compatible and sustainable into the future. And the imagery is showing the World Heritage Site as well as the very economically lucrative port. And the logos at the bottom are, which also were shown on all of the publicity material, were kind of showing the authority behind the many institutions involved in that climate resilience partnership. Moving on to some other universal principles of good communication that we have found useful. Segment the audience, where you can, where you have the resources and the time and the team to do so. Please think about the different subgroups within your overall target audience, and if you can, produce tailored communications, products and services to meet their specific needs. So an example, going back to that Indian poster, would be, if you have people with different native languages within your community, translate it into different languages, for instance. And work to identify who are the best messengers for your content. Who are the most likely people to capture the attention of your intended audience? It might not be you, and this is where you have to crank your ego down a notch or two. You may not be the best messenger personally, for engaging new audiences and certain climate content, climate messages. And there was a wonderful report launched earlier this week at the COP by the World Health Organization, which was founded on a lot of new research they've done that found doctors and nurses are probably the most trusted messengers of climate change messages because they're seen as neutral parties. That might not always be your answer, but think carefully about who carries credibility and authority with the people you're trying to reach, and get them as an ally. A case study here that we have is from Kenya, and how we framed some climate change messages for business audience. So CDKN has a partnership with Kenya Private Sector Alliance, known as KEPSA, to communicate climate change to the private sector in the country, looking at different elements of the private sector, for example, tourism, agro-processing and manufacturing. And together we produced briefing notes on climate change in your business, speaking about for each of those sectors how they could change their business to look out for their bottom line in a changing climate, what particular measures they had to take. So that's an example of audience segmentation, not just looking at the private sector as some kind of amorphous mass, but recognizing the different sectoral interests and entry points and how you could engage with them most effectively. And finally, on universal principles, request audience feedback often. And let me take this opportunity to say that we'll not only be requesting your feedback on this communications manual, as Shinaz has already said, but we'd actually like you to take a short survey at the end of this event to tell us how useful you found the information. Take every opportunity you can to consult with your audience, see if your messaging and your content is making sense to them, and if it's not, adapt. Here I have a diagram on how we can think about the universal principles of good communication coming together for the climate change arena. And we've thought about it as being that audience identification piece in the middle. That's the middle circle, which I've just described. And then we talk about the methods and channels, which are the three elements on the outer circle that could potentially be combined to reach them. They don't always apply, but I'll explain. Here we have knowledge products down in the bottom right-hand corner, tailored to your audience's needs. Then we have face-to-face communication in the lower left, which is important whenever you can afford it or you're in a context where you can engage in face-to-face communication. And then we have digital engagement on the top. And when we have been working with audiences at the international and the regional and the national levels, we've tried to combine all of those three methods in the outer circle, and we found that if you can integrate them effectively, then you essentially have a kind of 1 + 1 + 1 = 5 situation. If you can come up with tailored knowledge products which are shared effectively and workshopped face-to-face with people and in bilateral meetings, and you have a digital promotional campaign to back it up for people online who have got online access, and that's why I said, to the national level and in well-connected places at the subnational level, that can be super effective. Now, of course, when your intended audience for your communications is not digitally connected, and that becomes less important. But still, if you can think about how these different elements can interact together to be more than the sum of their parts, that will really make your communications campaign fly. Some other things I wanted to mention about the way that we and our partners have borrowed tactics, communications tactics from other sectors, and particularly I would say from public health campaigns, because I think they're involved with behavioural change. They've tended to lend themselves rather well to the climate change arena as well. I'll mention them here. We've tried out storytelling through theatre and role playing, and if any of you are attending Development Climate Days events at the weekend with our friends at IAED and the Red Cross Climate Centre, we'll be doing quite a bit of participatory theatre there as one mode of climate change communication and engagement. We've tried out toys, puppets, and 3D models for interaction. I think you have a picture there of a workshop actually with some ministry officials in Ghana to speak about coastal resilience measures for climate change, where lots of different kind of interactive toys were used actually to get the message across. And we've also, with partners in Lima, Peru, created 3D models of very climate vulnerable neighbourhoods, which have been constructed based on drone footage. And then we've used those as part of a public exhibit to get people together talking about, you can see here the model of the neighbourhood and how the different areas would be more vulnerable, and it has provided a very useful talking point, a platform on which to discuss solutions. And also very popular in the climate change arena, of course, as well as in other walks of life, are art and photography competitions, because it's a way to gather user-generated content, to say to your stakeholder group, hey, tell us what you're seeing, and to provide their own pictures for discussion. Now let's imagine that you've identified your target audience, and the contours of your communications campaign on climate change are shaping up. Probably worth thinking before you do an extensive consultation exercise and get it underway. What's it like to be in their shoes? How they're thinking, and this pretty much applies universally, whether they're a government official or a farmer. How does climate change affect me? Because ultimately that's what it comes down to at the end of the day. What am I going to do about it? Are the changes I'm experiencing in my environment part of something bigger? Will there be more changes in the future weather and climate in my area? What future changes should I expect and how soon? How can I cope better now? And how can I prepare for the future? So those, I mean, you hear a lot of climate jargon in the COP, right? People talking about climate variability and projections. But when you boil it down to a layperson's language, these are the basic questions that they're asking themselves. And for policy and business audiences, how will the change in weather and climate affect my company, or my jurisdiction, my constituents, or my financial portfolio? So we'll just talk through, and it's elaborated in greater detail in the manual itself, some sort of conceptual framings that we've used to talk about impacts of climate change. And we're recommending that you use human interest stories to illuminate climate change impacts, sort of in a nutshell, when you can, to capture people's attention, particularly when they're kind of like early on that journey of awareness raising and trying to make sense of what's going on around them. And back up those human stories with authoritative data and analysis, giving the big picture context. Of course, being sure of your science. I think the point that we're going to return to again and again, and Sylvie will speak more about this, is you know, none of us has got a climate change science degree, but we're practitioners. We've been working on this for years, but we always make sure that we go back and check our sources really, really carefully. And in this era of fake news, it's so important that you do have, you know, climate science specialists who are checking those statements. You know, whenever you're putting out a publication or a press release, or even a blog, and highlight where appropriate, you know, iconic cultural and historic and social assets that are at risk from climate change. You know, things that tap into people's emotions as well. That's a really important part of framing impacts. And be aware too, not just of disasters. You know, I've heard at many UNFCCC conferences, and it's true, that if there's a natural disaster, and if it's of a weather variety, and it can be tied to climate change, and we do speak about attribution of extreme weather events to climate change in the manual and some of the scientific sources for that. That is a good moment to get people's attention. It's when, you know, disasters hit the news headlines. It's when it, you know, comes up the policymakers' agenda, and that's when you can get people's attention. But we think it's really important as well to draw people's attention to those kind of those smaller and cumulative risks that every day are sort of chipping away at people's resilience. And some of the previous mechanisms that I referred to, like having a public exhibition about vulnerable neighbourhoods, and kind of pointing out those small-scale risks that together are chipping away at resilience and providing opportunities for creating resilience too. That should be part of our mission as communicators. So when we're talking about framing climate change impacts for business audiences, that's when it becomes useful to speak about risks, climate risks to company profits, and or indeed to entire business models posed by climate change. Impacts to workers, physical assets, production systems and supply chains. And this is what the IPCC's second working group on vulnerability and impacts did so effectively in its critical assessment reports, and gives us a good foundation to build on. When we're talking about framing impacts for public policy audiences, of course, it's clear that there are risks to achieving public policy goals, like ending extreme poverty, for example, posed by climate change itself. Then moving on to framing climate adaptation solutions, I think for every audience, action on adaptation can be framed as a way of preventing loss of livelihoods and assets, even lives, sadly, in this day and age. And also, it's important to show that, you know, the co-benefits. I think that's another golden thread that weaves through all of this. You know, you can take positive actions on adaptation. You can embrace solutions that make economic sense and are appealing. Good news works, after all, even more than bad news. When framing for businesses, action on adaptation creates a resilient firm. And I think there's a way that, as a communicator, you can frame that as creating long-term prospects for stability and value in a firm, even growth. when you're framing for public policy audiences. I think there's a real opportunity, although it depends on having deeper economic analysis behind it, on speaking about the ways that adaptation action today can cost less than waiting for more climate change impacts to get hit and then having to clean up the mess afterwards. And we have an example in the manual of how we were able to fund a deeper research project into the economics of adaptation in Uganda, and then do a lot of public communications and also policy making decisions around that. And of course, when we're engaging with public policy audiences, there are many obligations but also opportunities offered by the Paris Agreement and related national commitments, the NDCs and so forth. Moving now to climate change mitigation. This is again where that golden thread of co-benefits becomes absolutely critical and can create a really compelling public narrative. So speaking about how climate-friendly solutions can support, for example, health and well-being co-benefits. Again, this week, in such a clear and compelling way, we've heard from the World Health Organization about how actually, if you take tackling air pollution as an entry point into the 7 million deaths annually that it's causing around the globe, which is utterly horrifying, if you take that as an entry point and try to tackle that, then you will instigate action because of the clear near-term benefits that tackling air pollution generally, but you'll also be dealing with the climate change problem at the same time. And of course, there are entry points in zero, if you're promoting low or zero emission transport and energy systems, there are many other development co-benefits which those would deliver as well. So my home institution, the Overseas Development Institute, for example, has done a lot of work about how clean transport systems can reduce road-related deaths and reduce traffic accidents. So if we look on the website of the Low Emission Development Strategies Global Partnership, ledsgdp.org, you would find many more policy briefings about the co-benefits of mitigation action like this. And of course, the one that's been around for a while, energy efficiency. Many of the actions that you can frame in climate mitigation campaigns have to do with simply reducing the demand for energy, being more energy efficient, and therefore saving money, which is a winner for everybody. Framing for public policy audiences, it covers many of the same areas, and also framing for business and economic orientated audiences. You can talk about the possibility of creating green jobs in green industries. In today's, or rather this week's discussions in the COP, we've also heard about the need for a just transition, and it's a bit more complicated than just saying there's green jobs, because there often has to be retraining and reskilling to go along with it. Moving on to the next section of our communications guide, we talk a lot about the importance of forging partnerships for impact. And this story that we're showing on this slide, with all those easels, there's school children in Cartagena, Colombia, who we engaged in a painting competition. We partnered with schools to try and capture the imagination of both the school children and their parents and grandparents and extended families on what does, resilient Cartagena of the future look like. Let's not just dwell on all the risks, but we're here forging the common future together. We want it to be resilient and competitive and a livable city. So let's put that down with our paintbrushes and share it. You can really crowdsource information to support climate action, as I say here. They've created a kind of shared lived experience with the community of many dozens of people who to participate on a weekly or monthly basis. And as it says here, it became not just a way of documenting the impacts of climate change and the more unpredictable rainfall, but also those elements of human mismanagement that were making water courses more vulnerable. It's also a way for people to discuss common solutions and start planning those solutions together. Now, a really important element in all of CDKN's work is turning up the volume of voices that haven't been heard. So everyone has a voice, but is that voice given a platform? Is it given an opportunity to be heard? Maybe the voices of more marginalised or disadvantaged ethnic groups or castes or classes in society, or women, or people living with various types of disability, or older or younger people. And in the manual, we document different ways that those voices have been turned up and brought into the public debate, both in terms of speaking about their lived experience of impacts and their ideas for solutions. And ways this has happened through CDKN projects have been through radio broadcasts, where, for example, teenage girls have been invited in the Indian Himalaya to give broadcasts on how they're coping with climate change impacts. Or, as in the case of another Indian state, women were trained to use video equipment and to film each other and just talking about climate impacts on agriculture and how they were coping and what kind of assistance they wanted from the outside. And then an expert film producer who had come from Delhi helped to patch it together into a finished product, and then it was screened from the national level and back down to the village level again. Now we'll speak a little bit about the power of visualization and graphic techniques, because this tool and technique is very much on the rise. It can be a powerful one, and in fact we found it can be utterly instrumental in sort of catalyzing new conversations across different sectors and stakeholder groups. Certainly data visualization techniques can present the impacts of climate change, current and projected under different scenarios. And of course we all know that by demonstrating the potential and very dangerous future impacts of climate change under a high emission scenario, that's probably the best instigator ever for sort of compelling mitigation action. So what we show here is a current and a future scenario for Bangladesh. It's called the Surging Seas tool, and it's being developed in both English and Bangla languages. It's a sort of online interactive, but CDKN and its partners have used it very much in a sort of workshop setting, and you can sort of turn up and down the dial and show under the different emission scenarios that, you know, to the end of the century, what kind of sea level rise would that correlate with, and, you know, how many hectares and how many millions of current and projected population of the Delta region would be affected. Very powerful tool indeed. And sometimes it can be a decisive factor if you get a stakeholder, for example, from a government agency, who's able to see that visualised, and then they can pass it on to others in their working environment. It can really instigate new policies and programmes. And then I'm quickly going to say something about walking the walk, and our responsibility as communicators to be as low carbon as we possibly can in our work, because after all, we don't want to be flying people willy-nilly around the world when we're trying to be a part of the solution. So we do have a section of the manual which talks about how can you use information and communication technologies to, you know, the ultimate extent to sort of lower your emissions as a communicator. That's one element of it. It does come with a health warning, which is recently a report was released by the Web Foundation saying that you know, certain segments of the global community are being left behind in the digital revolution, and they are predominantly rural and they are predominantly female, so that's really a mind the gap issue. I mean, again, it gets back to the very initial conversation we had about who's the audience that you're trying to target and making sure that you're being inclusive and not inadvertently further marginalising the group by the communications method that you choose. There are also things you can do though about when you're setting up a campaign at the outset. You can do training of trainers type methodologies when you get a core group of people on the same page. You give them a bunch of communication tools and then you send them out. And a lot of NGOs do this anyway, from the national to the subnational and community community level. So sending people out in communities with guidebooks, with posters, with kind of offline tools. You know, and that essentially is quite a low carbon way of doing business as well. I'm going to stop there. Cindy's going to speak about how this has all come together in one project.
Thanks, Mary. I'm just going to ask those in the room, how many have read an IPCC report from the start to the end? Oh, wow. I am super, super impressed. Because we've had a challenge where, you know, how do you communicate what's in the IPCC reports? It's normally very scientific, very jargon heavy, and when you read the summary for policymakers, you often feel like, okay, so what does this mean? What does this actually say to me? And what am I supposed to do in my day-to-day job if I'm the Minister of Agriculture? What am I supposed to do now? So CDKN began a journey working with the IPCC to try and distill some of the scientific jargon into much easier to use language, into language that everyday people, everyday policymakers would understand. And it was more difficult than you would expect, right? Because you don't want to dilute the message, the scientific message, where something could be medium confidence. You don't want to say, well, this is definitely a risk in your area. So how do you balance the messaging from the IPCC, from scientists, into something that's usable and relevant in day-to-day activities? So we produced a number of regionally specific reports. They were the ones in it for Africa. That's the one I work with predominantly. But we also did South Asia, Latin America. We also did have small island states as well. And the key to this was also developing a range of infographics, which are very easy to see. So you can see at the bottom right, probably your right. Those were some of the examples of the infographics we developed that put together the risks that you could see, that you'd have in specific sub-regions in Africa as well, and what the confidence level was in terms of that risk. But developing a report and developing infographics is one thing. And as Mary has talked about, there are different ways of reaching audiences. So the CDKN website was one way in which people could download the infographics, get the report, but actually ultimately our audience was not really going to use the CDKN website. So we designed a range of outreach events together with the IPCC. And we found that it was very important to have IPCC authors from those countries, if there were any, or IPCC authors from that region. Now, for the AR5, the Africa region was relatively underrepresented in terms of scientific authors, but we did manage to bring some together. They could actually speak the language of what the policymakers would understand because they understood the context a little bit more. And we did this in Kenya, we did this in Uganda, and in Ethiopia. So it was very East African specific. We did end up doing another one in South Africa, and that was more Southern Africa, and we managed to bring together policymakers from other Southern African countries. And the key to some of this was also looking at how do we look at the key priority sectors and then give the messaging around that? And how do we start the dialogue with the scientists and the policymakers so that there is no dilution of a message? It's straight from the horse's mouth, and you can set up these round tables with the scientists and the policymakers, because that's actually one of the missing links, ironically. You think it's a little bit practical and everyone would do these things, but there's still this missing gap. Another thing we looked at was how do we, within these countries, communicate the risks even further. And we hosted a range of trainings with journalists. And we tried to also bring the editors of the different newspapers as well, because some journalists would say, well, you know, you could train me, but if my editor doesn't buy into the story, I will never be able to publish it. So I'll have to be publishing what the editor seems to think is business of the day. So we had to bring the editors together to get them on board as well. And this worked quite well, particularly in Ethiopia as well as Kenya, where there was a diverse range of journalists, including radio, which is very important, particularly in the rural areas as well. You don't get a lot of print media, and social media was very limited at the time that we were doing these outreach events. Another thing that we tried to do was we tried to bring in the youth, and how do we engage with the people who are studying sciences. How do we get them more brought into actually looking into climate change? Because that's one of the biggest gaps that we have, is we don't have a lot of research that's being done and that's actually being peer reviewed. So how do we start to fill that gap so that 10 years from now, maybe the 7th assessment report will have a lot more country-specific research that would drive knowledge. So those were the 3 sort of strategies that we use, which bring together a lot of what Mary has talked about in terms of identifying an audience, looking at what it is that they need and who they should get this information from, but also particularly in terms of the formats. Face-to-face from our region in Africa is particularly significant, mainly because there are limitations to what you can do virtually, and also people engage much more when you see them face-to-face. You can really get to understand each other from that point of view. So that was the strategy that we used, and I think it was quite successful. I don't know if anyone has any questions around that. I'm happy to talk about that.
So that brings to an end our formal presentation. We were seeking feedback on the ideas, so we're going to ask everyone in the room now to come in with questions, suggestions, their insights. Do you agree with, our top tips and tricks, or do you have completely different ones? And we are actually looking to integrate your ideas into the next version of the manual, as Shinaz said. So please share with us now, or write to us on this address, cdkn@southsouthnorth.org.
Thank you, CDKN. It has been a very enlightening and constructive meeting. Like you said, going on live will probably bring in more voices. I think communication is a key issue for the negotiators. I've been a negotiator most of my life, and it is difficult to be able to communicate to the different levels of society, because it's not the same thing if I go into the rural area, or if I talk at a university, or if I talk to to other sectors, private sector, for example. Therefore, I am in the process of learning how to communicate, because I believe it's very important that we can transcend what is taking place, what is being decided, and how it affects everyone in society. So I truly thank you for this opportunity, and congratulations, and continue the good work. Thank you very much.
Thank you.